This week, I'd like to welcome Gregory Offner to the show. Gregory is a multi-talented individual with a passion for entertaining and educating others. His keynotes, workshops, and corporate consulting engagements help the world's leading organizations create high-performing and highly fulfilled leaders. Prior to this work, Greg led global sales and marketing efforts for several Fortune 100 organizations, brokered complex risk management and insurance programs for large commercial organizations, and drove process improvement initiatives as a certified Lean Six Sigma practitioner. But during that time, Greg lived a double life. And by day, he was in his suit and tie wearing professional, but at cover of night, he was known as Junior, a world-renowned professional dueling pianist. As an entertainer, Greg has performed on stages of every size for audiences on 5 continents, and his ability to integrate fun and energy into his programming, yes, he often uses a piano on stage, transforms his program from a keynote speech to a keynote experience. So Greg, welcome to the show.
Nigel, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So tell us a little bit about you and your background before those, your notes, your bio there, obviously. You'll recognize some of those words as I always plagiarize from my guests' websites.
Yeah, I always listen to that and I think, what idiot wrote that? And then it's like, oh yeah, me. I'm the idiot that wrote that. Like it's way too long. I think that's way too long. So let's talk about that. So what is, I think, maybe the key takeaway for somebody, for me, who I am and what it is that I do. I had this very unusual beginning to my career in that I studied music and psychology and philosophy in school. And I know what you're thinking. You must have been beating the ladies off with a stick with that combo degree. But I really had no idea where I was going to fit into the world when I graduated. And so, like many people, had nothing to do with my degree when it came to the first job I took. I landed in a job in sales. And it turned out I was pretty good at it, because really what sales is for many people is just acting. So I joke with people and say I had actually a corporate acting job when I first started. I acted like a professional, and I guess I was pretty good because they bought it. They bought it for a long time. But in 2015, that double life you mentioned that I was leading sort of caught up to me. And acting and performing all day on the corporate stage as a sales executive and leading sales teams and whatnot, performing on actual stages in the evening, leading audiences of drunk people and sober people too, but mainly people who'd had a couple cocktails, because the more they drink, the better we sound. Leading them through a night of fun and favorite songs and sing-alongs and funny bits and things. That all taxed my voice to a point that was just tremendously unhealthy. And I found myself in a situation where doctors said if I didn't stop, if I didn't do a hard reset on some of the habits that I developed throughout my life, and if I didn't get medical surgical intervention to repair and rebuild all the damage that had accumulated on my vocal cords, I ran the very real risk of never speaking again. And that was something that, for someone who uses their voice all day, that shook me to my core. That really challenged who I thought I was, the value that I thought I brought to the world. And it made me get comfortable with discomfort as I launched into then changing all of those habits and behaviors that I developed throughout my life, really reinventing in a way who I was. And so I decided to grab that opportunity and sort of juice it to the fullest. If I'm going to reinvent who I am, I ain't just going to stop with how I use my voice and my social habits. I'm going to change everything that I am not content with. And from the outside in, most people wouldn't have guessed that I wasn't content with where I was professionally. Now, I was doing well financially. I, had some prestige associated with some of the jobs that I've had, but none of that fulfilled me. None of that really did anything for me. It was like nice on the outside, but like, ugh, on the inside. Yeah. So for me, while it was something I'd rather not have had to go through, losing my voice was one of the best experiences and opportunities of my life. And as I say that, I realized that my little device here has broken. So just give me 1 second to change out this battery pack. I'm sorry.
No worries.
What's going on here, guys? Why is this not working? hopefully that's better because I think I can hear me now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
All right, man. What a way to get started. Technical difficulties behind us. On we go.
It took me 15 minutes to get one show started the other day. I just couldn't get anything to work. It was, and then another one. When I was trying to struggle with it, Zoom decided to cut me out on something, and then I had to restart and reinvite them. So it was just, IT is wonderful.
I mean, I always tell people they're lucky when my video cuts out. I sort of save them, but yeah, audio is really important for a podcast, eh?
Yeah.
So I can hear you. You can hear me. I'm guessing you got most of what I just said.
I heard all of it. There was no cuts.
Perfect. Okay, so it was just on my end with the in-ears. Perfect.
Yeah, it must have been, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think you were talking about the fact that you just lost that sort of thing where you'd lost your voice and how it was kind of a good thing in some ways in hindsight, and you changed everything.
Yeah, well, everything can be a good thing in hindsight, and I do mean that. I mean, if we look for it, there's opportunity to learn and grow from everything we experience, good and bad. I mean, that's a very good and bad are very subjective words. There's hard to say there's something objectively good or objectively bad. It really just depends on your positioning and perspective. So, if you think your significant other's a chatterbox, then maybe losing their voice is objectively good for one and objectively bad for the other. But for me, it was that needed pause. It was a challenge. It was an element of life that I couldn't just barrel through, because that's what I sort of did. I was a very determined individual, head down, sort of barrel through problems. I mean, I started out life at a military school. One of my first educational experiences was in a military environment. So that really taught me a lot about resilience, about self-leadership. And I guess this is where it comes from. It developed within me a not refuse to lose, but refuse to give up sort of mentality. So even though I didn't necessarily like the professional direction my life was heading in, I said, well, the money's good. It'll get better. So just keep going, head down, keep driving. And there's nothing objectively bad about that decision, but it didn't fulfill me. And in many ways, that losing my voice created the opportunity in life for me to stop and find and actually stop and think about what would fulfill me. Because I'd spent a lot of time identifying, well, I don't like that. I don't like that. Okay, well, what do you like? I don't know, but I got stuff to do. I'll figure that out later. Yeah. Later never comes. I mean, that's, some people don't learn that until they're 80 or 90 years old. And the doctor's like, hey, this is about it for you. We're going to wrap that life up. This is the end of the line for you, my friend. And then they realize all the things that they didn't pursue that they wanted. I got lucky in that, for me as a speaker and a singer, being told you're going to lose your voice is death-like. I'm not minimizing when people are really told you have a terminal diagnosis, but it's about as close to a death-like experience as I ever want to get, this young anyway. So
massively life-changing, isn't it?
Yeah, massively.
It's interesting what you say about that, about the how it kind of reset you to look at things and kind of something you couldn't barrel through that typically probably wasn't serving you that well when you've just barreled on through something. And some of us can be determined, and in my audience, I'm sure we've been in that situation where we've been delivering projects and it's got to get it over the line. You've just, through the sheer force of will and carrying PCs and whatever, to get it over the line. And in hindsight, you'll sit back and look at it and go, actually, we shouldn't have done that. Perhaps we should have stopped, reset, and done something different. And it reminded me of, I don't know whether you get it, there's a TV show in the UK with a guy who's a guy called Wim Hof, who is the Iceman. I don't know, you've nodding on that. So I'm sure you've heard of it. So they did a show with a bunch of UK celebrities recently, and they had I've forgotten his blooming name, footballer who used to play for Manchester, Patrice Evra, brilliant footballer. And he was one of these guys. There was one section where they were sitting in the ice, in the cold water, just in their swimming gear. And it was like the last one in wins or whatever it was. And the others all gave up after 2 or 3 minutes, and he wouldn't give up. And you're saying about barreling on through. He just wasn't. He was there. No, I'm not going up. I'm not going. And his core, the other thing, checking the core temperature. His core temperature was down below the safe level, to the point where they were. The host, Holly Willoughby, was about to drag him out physically herself. She was saying it, because he was that point where he was. But it was that mindset of, well, I can just. And a lot of background and history of him, of why he was like that. But then the thing that I thought was really interesting is a couple of, I dipped in and out of this show. I kind of watched it through other people in some ways. And there was another section where they would die swimming underneath the ice. So they've got holes in the ice and they'd swim from one to the other. And he was struggling through, and he got to one point and he said, no, I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to give up. And it was kind of the flip side of psychological and personal development of, he wasn't someone who needed to build up resilience to just keep going. He needed to know when to stop. And that was the thing that he learned. And everyone was absolutely delighted about the fact that he said, it's okay to fail. And it's okay not to have succeeded. And it was just what you're saying there, just reminds me of that position that you get put into, which was involuntary for you, and just made you go, right, okay, now I need to change.
What you're talking about, I think, Nigel, is what's popping into my brain, into my thought process, is the fallacy of sunk cost. So there's that idea of being pot committed, that, well, the money's already in there. So yeah. And that really applies to this situation. And when we think about failure, I know that for me, it was very tempting to go, well, I said I was going to do this, so I got to do it. I'm committed. And the truth is, no, you don't. If you decide to make a new decision based on new circumstances, it's a better decision. In fact, mathematically, you'll hear economists talk about this, that what's the game show called that was Monty Hall initially here, I think in the US anyway, was it Let's Make a Deal? May not have been Monty Hall, but whoever the person was. And at the end, they generally have 3 doors, right? Or 3 curtains that you can choose between. And so they say curtain 1, curtain 2, curtain 3. And so you pick one. And then they say, well, all right, you picked that curtain, but now there's 2 other curtains here. Do you want to pick one of these 2 curtains? That's a new choice. And an economist would tell you that you should take one of those 2 new curtains. That's a new choice. But many people say, nah, this is my choice. Excuse me. This is my choice. I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah.
In the context of a game show, who cares? But in the context of our life, you made the decision that you were going to swim under the ice from hole to hole to hole. But then you get to a certain point, you go, I don't care about what's at the end of this. I'm not really committed to the process. Sunk cost fallacy would tell us, well, but I was committed at one previous time, and so I've got to stay in it now. No, make a new decision. Make a better decision, hopefully, is what we're doing. And that, for me, was what the opportunity that I got from losing my voice was. A pause, I think of it as maybe the universe asking me, hey, do you want to make a different decision about how you're spending your days, how you're living your life? And I would have ordinarily said, I'm too busy. I got too many things going on. This is my bed. I'm going to lie in it and sort of move with it. But making that decision, being willing to not I don't call it a failure of a business career. It wasn't for me. It wasn't working for somebody else as a sales employee or a sales leader. It wasn't for me. Just didn't do it. But I learned a lot from it. And I bet that footballer learned a lot from his both journey in the ice bath and journey swimming under the ice.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's quite, as you say, it's not necessarily a failure. And failure is an interesting phrase I've got written on my wall here. It says fail fast, learn quick. The kind of a little bit of the agile mantra kind of things. I talk to my daughters about the fact that you've got to fail. And I did like something. It's one of these tweet things where it's, FAIL stands for first action in learning, or something like that. Someone took it as an acronym, which I really like, because myself, as a sport, I do judo, and you learn how to fail in judo, because it doesn't matter how good you are, you will always come up against someone who's better, or just you're not concentrating and they're lucky. And it's all about getting back up, carrying on and doing it, but accepting the failure as part of what it is, which is learning something. It's feedback, isn't it? It's a feedback loop on life. And anything that you don't succeed in, there's something in there, even if it's, I shouldn't have started that in the first place, that you learn about. And I think within the project space as well, I think I hear stuff about 70% of projects fail, but how many of those projects shouldn't have even got as far as they did because they weren't serving the business, they weren't the right scope, life changed, as you say, things alter from a priority point of view. You draw the pandemic into it, you can have businesses, someone might, I did see something on the Britons, the equivalent of Shark Tank in America, the Dragon's Den over here. They had some guys who, I can't for the life of me think what the two businesses were. I think actually it may have been the second one, may have been around hand cleanser and hand sanitizer business, but they pivoted from one business that was completely customer facing, it might have even been food and drink sort of thing, and then completely changed their business to suit the what's going on there. In a smaller business, you can do that. Bigger business is harder to do. But again, with projects, sometimes as a project manager, we get target obsessed on the fact that we've got to hit the time, cost, quality. But actually, the whole point of that time, cost, quality is the benefit it delivers afterwards. And it's the benefit that's the important thing we should focus on. And sometimes, and similar to in, like say, your careers life, you could achieve all those metrics, but actually, if what you want, the fact that you succeeded doesn't matter one way or the other if it's not going in the direction you want to go.
Yeah, there's a simple question that I use with my clients, and it seems relevant here based on what we're discussing. And it's a question that actually starts out as a statement, but an unfinished statement. And the statement is, which will allow me to blank? Now, here's why I say it's a question. Because what I ultimately want to know is why. Why are we doing this? But why is such a confrontational question? It's often not really productive, especially in like cross-divisional or cross-functional meetings. Why it's sort of seen as a threat to status or a threat to authority. So using the phrase, which will allow me or which will allow us to, and then sort of fill in the blank, if you will, creates a lot of learning opportunity for us in a process. So, we're going to hit these time, cost, quality metrics, which will allow us to blank. What's the answer? And then that's going to produce another line of which will allow us to blank. So hit our time, cost, quality, which will allow us to keep the boss happy. I don't know what the answer is, but we want to keep the boss happy, which will allow us to keep our jobs. All right, so really what I've just learned, Nigel, is that you don't give a damn about the time, cost, quality. All you're trying to do is keep your job. Yeah. Now at least we have an honest goal, and there's probably more, keeping my job will allow me to feed my family. Okay, so you don't need this job, you need a job, right? Let's be honest, if all you want to do is feed your family, who cares about the TCQ? You just need income. So when we get to, and that helps us get to what I call a root goal. And when we get to the root goal, we can actually assess, is what I'm doing helping me get to what I really care about? In the case of your footballer, probably not. Swimming through the ice didn't get him to what he really cared about. We don't know what he really cared about, but we can tell because he decided that this was no longer a path he wanted to go down. To your point about projects, asking these questions earlier on in the planning process, in the scoping process, the purpose of this project is to blank, which will allow us to what? If we find out that what, maybe we don't even need this project. So to your point, 70% of failure rate, that's debatable, right? Some say that a lot of failures aren't reported, so it should be higher at like 80. But that failure rate can change. But more importantly, the fulfillment rate can change for the people involved in these projects, because what is more demoralizing, disheartening than spending time working on a project that we all know we're spinning our wheels on, we all know is not really serving the goals, but somebody upstairs signed a check and we're pot committed, so we got to do it. No, no, we don't. In fact, I believe we shouldn't.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. I love that phrase that they use there, which will allow me to. No, I've got a note there of the timing of that, so I can pull that out for the exit when I'm sending it social media job. But yeah, because it's the 4-year-old, isn't it? Can I have some sweets, Mum? No. Why? Well, because of the why. For the why, and eventually, quite often as a parent, you'll go, "'Cause I say so." But why just and it takes a long time to get to that why. I was in my business analyst training that I had many years ago. It was about asking, right, what we do this. Well, why do you do that? And it's, well, we do it because this. Oh, but why does that happen? And it's the same thing in a softer way, isn't it? Of being able to do it. And it's actually really, I think, a really good introspective way of doing it, which will allow me to, if you're looking at your career, if you're thinking about what your own personal things are about, if you're all sat in a room, is why are we doing this, which will allow me, and you can all go through that process of understanding, but having to go all the way to the bottom of it. I really like that. It's really interesting.
And you can apply it to other things in life. I mean, I remember at one point, I wasn't ready to start this business. I was in the planning phase of making the shift, but I wasn't ready. I had a rough week, a real rough week at my day job. And I remember thinking, I'm going to go in on Monday and dramatically and ceremoniously quit. I'm just going to quit. I thought, man, what's that going to do for me? So I'm going to quit, which will allow me to what? And as I thought about that, I realized that I wanted to feel like I was in charge.
It's control, isn't it?
It was control. Wanted to quit because it was my way of asserting control. But what happens after we quit? I would be not only less in control, but I would be less well resourced. So it was a very emotional decision. And so we can apply this question not only in professional, but in personal circumstances too. You know, decisions. I want to buy this home. I want to buy a new car. I want to find a new spouse. I want to get rid of my current spouse. You know, whatever decisions we're going through in life, this type of development, you know, we were talking pre-show and you talked about soft skill development. I like to think of development in two ways within business, the opportunity that businesses have to develop their people. One, and where we currently spend most of our money. There's $300 billion a year spent by the global business community on training and development. 98% of that is spent on operational development, job-specific training. Get better at the job you're in, skills you're going to use operationally in the job that you're in. Only 2% of it is spent on what I call aspirational training. And here in the US, there's a slogan that was used by the United States Army for about 20-something years. It was the longest tenured slogan that they ever used. And the slogan was, "Be all you can be." That's an aspirational slogan. And at the top of Maslow's pyramid, when we talk about human needs, is self-actualization. Put another way, becoming all we are capable of becoming. So when we look at where the business community spends its time and its money developing its people, it's not in service of them becoming all that they're capable of becoming. It's about them becoming a little bit more efficient at what they're already doing. And the statistics coming out of all sorts of labor agencies around the world tell us that most people aren't that excited about what they're currently doing. That's why we saw the Great Reset and the Great Resignation. But many people don't believe or don't actually have the skills to make a transition. Some of them haven't identified what it is they even want to transition to. I was in that cohort. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I didn't like what I was doing. You're talking about little kids. Like, isn't that the thing? Mom, I'm bored. All right, what do you want to do? I don't know. How am I supposed to help you?
yeah, it's absolutely right. But it draws that base thing, doesn't it? On that is that it's really funny because the conversation I had with another guest earlier today, he's got a book about called The Career Toolkit, and it talks about those soft skills as a lot of people talk about them. That the, what I see as the fundamental skills, those are the base. If you can be, if you can be brilliant at something, but if you can't play nicely with other humans or efficiently with other humans, being really good at something isn't a lot of use for most people. You get the some of the brilliant jerks out there that can get away with it and kind of through sheer force of will be brilliant at what they're doing and be able to force through. But if you are not a good communicator, if you're not a good negotiator, if you're not someone who can time manage properly, do you know what I mean? All those sort of those I still think of kind of base things. They're not about doing the job, they're about how you do the job. And that's the thing is the bit where we can really leverage our people and ourselves.
Well, and it's hard because our entire life, it seems right now, is built up around getting to the next part of life. So if you're in school, right, whether it's at the elementary level or at the collegiate level, most students aren't necessarily interested in learning. They're interested in learning what they need to know to pass the test, to get the grade, to get to the next level, to pass the test, to get to the next exam, to get to the next form, to graduate, to get the job, to get the next job. It's all about the next thing. And we're never really enjoying or intentionally growing from what we're doing right now. And so to call it a fundamental skill, I think, is true, but also pointing out something very sad, that we don't spend intentional time as a global society developing those foundational skills. We brush right past them and say, don't worry about learning and remembering all that stuff. Just learn it long enough to pass the test, and then you'll have new stuff to learn next year.
Yeah. It's just
oh boy.
And I can kind of understand the education system in some ways, but it doesn't. And I listened to Seth Godin a few times talking about his views on the school system, obviously the American one mainly, but it is about the school system's about teaching you how to pass a test. It's not about teaching and giving you some basic grounding in skills, but actually the goal is to pass the test, and to pass the test at a higher level as set by the government organizations, so that business can quickly and easily sift you when they look at a CV. So they can go there and go, right, they're at that grade. Oh, that's fine. We'll have them. No, we won't have those. It makes it quicker, easier. It doesn't actually make it right. It makes it quicker and easier. What they get is a bunch of people who know how to revise and pass for a test. They don't necessarily know people who can apply those tools and techniques. And I know that with some of the stuff with my girls going through, I've got a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they're going through this process. And I know I've seen with my eldest, who was really good, she's a very good artist, she's really good at drawing, really good at anything art wise. She went into secondary school, lots of study of art history, lots of things of different techniques and tools, and less about the creativity, and turned her off to it completely. Within 6 months of being there, that was her least favorite subject. Whereas prior to that, you couldn't stop her drawing something just for fun. And fortunately, she still does, and she will pick it back up, I'm sure. But the system seemed to kind of push you. They don't keep that passion, that love, and that interest in these topics that they have. Whether they, and it's, I recognize it's hard to do it and fit it all in. But again, if you've got a kid who's good into music, they love the music, there will be a level of creativity in there. But the music's a hard one because it takes a long time, doesn't it, to learn those basics in order to then really start being creative. But even so, the music doesn't teach you anything about super creative as part of that process. And playing music, being creative with your own music is whilst I wouldn't say I'm any good at it, I do like messing around on a guitar and just with a few vocals on my own, and I find great pleasure and great relaxation doing that. But
well, it's its own language.
yeah,
Music is a language. That's what I think sets folks who study music apart from others. Is that even from a young age, you don't know Mandarin, maybe you do, maybe you don't. You don't know Spanish, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you've taken piano lessons, you know music. And that's a language. It's a different way of thinking about organizing and synthesizing symbols. You know, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G are nothing more than symbols. We call them letters, but they're symbols. Just like back in the day, you know, pre-linguistic society just used drawings. And that's how we all, you know, communicated. Musical notes are symbols. That staff is just like a sentence. So music has sentences, it has paragraphs. We call them different things because in the language of music, we have different terms for them. You know, in the English language, it's a sentence, it's a paragraph. And so understanding that language opens up different neural pathways, creates different neural pathways in the brain, and opens up the opportunity to process experiences in a different way. That's really all intelligence is data points. The more data points you and I have to link and correlate an experience, the more intelligent we are. So that's why there are some people that I admire who have sayings like, if you can see it, you can be it. If you can understand how it operates, if you can see it, whether it's in your mind or in reality, if you can envision it, you're closer to being able to do it. That's a really, really important concept. And so that's why young students are taken to see masters perform on the piano or on the oboe or the cello or whatever. They're exposed to people who are performing at such a high level that they say, oh, I see how that's done. I can do that now. I've seen another human being. It's not just an MP3 file that I'm listening to. There's a real person making that.
Yeah.
It's much more tangible. That's why I think, you know, in the project management world, mentorship is so important because you can see how someone who's more tenured has done it. Even though the material's laid out in front of you, even though the reference material, the coursework is all there to become more skilled and to gain advanced designation, you want to see someone else doing it. And that, I think, opportunity, whether you're an artist, a musician, a poet, you know, no matter what art you practice, you're opening up that creative vein that you talked about that's so critical.
Yeah. I think that the thing for me is there's creativity in everything. And I think, and I've said this on the show before, if people who listen to this will probably get bored of it, is you've got that, your base skills, your technical skills of project management that anyone can learn. You've got your technical skills of a musician, you know, your scales, and then you can learn other pieces and stuff. But, and I talk about chiseling, what's the name, Venus de Milo. You can do all of the techniques for creating a piece of artwork, for all of the techniques for creating skin texture, for hair texture, whatever. You may be brilliant at all those, but putting them all together into something that is a piece of art, is a good piece of music, that is a brilliantly put together project plan. All these things you can, project delivery, sorry. I see that there's this art element that sits across it. And it's about using those tools, using the techniques in the PM book and all those sort of things. But you've kind of got to get your own style and get your own, learn that your whole way of doing it, and little tips and tricks from other people, which isn't taught. You can't teach it, because the way that I build a relationship with a stakeholder compared to someone else building a relationship with a stakeholder will be different, because we're different humans. And sometimes I'll use some of the tools and techniques they'd use. Sometimes they use the tools and techniques I'd use in the style, but there will be something subtly different. There will be you about it. And I think it's, and that's where the creativity comes into all of our jobs, I think. And it's like you were saying with your sales techniques, you'll have read Napoleon Hill and read the, what's the name? What's the guy, the insurance salesman? Jim Betcher or something like that. There was a book from many years ago. He's the guy. I can't remember his name. I've read it myself. I'm sure it was the guy who sold it. He went somewhere and one of his teachers said to when he went for an interview, he said, well, sell me that ashtray. And he basically didn't sell him the ashtray. He sold him the need that he had rather than the ashtray. That's the basic thing. But again, you can learn all those techniques, but then you're going to put your spin on it and your style on it and your relationship building and of who you are and your creativity. And that's what I think sometimes we get knocked out of us, don't we?
Well, Yes. And the 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 issue of legacy knowledge has become a really interesting one right now. Because what you're talking about in terms of you have to see someone else do it, you can't pick it up on your own. I mean, it's harder to pick it up on your own,
Yeah.
but not all musicians see someone play every piece they've ever played before. What they have are they have these foundational elements, these building blocks of musical creativity. So they are the scales, they are rhythm, they are harmony. So without getting super music and technical, they're the circle of fourths, the circle of fifths. There are these different theory elements to music that once you understand them allow you to be more intentionally creative. There are people who are accidentally creative. I mean, the elephant who paints a work of art. Is that intentional? Is it accidental? Who's to say?
Yeah.
But when the musician is building that foundation, I'd argue that the skills within the foundation are less important than the sort of hidden skill that they're building, which is the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn quickly. And it's funny that you say that school does sort of grade us and put us into neat little boxes for someone else to be able to select from. But if there's anything that school should really be prized or proud of itself for teaching, it should be the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Except they're not doing that. It's the ability to memorize, which isn't the same thing as learning. That's just remember. The ability to memorize, forget, and then rememorize all over again. It's not the same thing as learning. There's an internalization process when it comes to learning. When it comes to music, there's muscle memory that's associated with those scales.
Yeah.
And it's shown that folks who are in Alzheimer's wards, who can't remember their name or their children's names or the first kiss, they remember a piece of music. They're alivened, they're awakened. I mean, so our daughter's 20 months old. There is a movie called Coco that's out right now that's all about, a father who disappeared. I won't just spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen Coco yet. Or if you're a parent, you're like, I've seen it 5,000 times. Shut up, Greg.
It's a good film.
There's a bit at the end, right, where Mama Coco is catatonic basically throughout this whole movie. And then thanks to a song, she's reconnected with her childhood and comes to life. It's moving. And so the skill that musicians learn, the skill that I teach some of my clients, in fact, I call it the performer's process. We learn something, then we practice it, then we rehearse it, and then we perform it. And what I found in the corporate world is that folks learn and then go perform. There's no practice and there's no rehearsal. Practice is when we break a piece of music or we break a skill or a concept down into manageable parts. So in a musical piece, you might practice the first few measures, the next few measures. You might practice the verse, then the chorus, then the verse, then the chorus. But you're breaking that whole 3-minute, or if it's, a classical piece, it could be 10 minutes long. You're breaking that whole piece down into a more manageable part so you can practice it. And then you get good at the first part and you link that to the second part. But then we got to rehearse. Because to take something we've practiced and then just go put it on stage opens up the door to a lot of variables. And you can see these if you Google piano recital gone wrong. All sorts of funny things happen. A leg on the bench falls out from under you and you go toppling over. Maybe the piano sustain pedal isn't working. Whatever. Issues happen. In real life, in the work world, in the real world, issues happen. So we want to not only practice the skills and the competencies that are important for our role, but we want to rehearse them in tougher than real life situations. So if real life is just assume things are going to go as per usual in a sales call, when I'm rehearsing with a team what a sales call might look like, we might be flipping the lights on and off, trying to distract people. We might have someone go stand in the corner and pretend to have a really loud or boisterous phone call while the person we're rehearsing with is rehearsing their sales pitch. Because if they can do it under those challenging circumstances, they're going to do it in the real world. They're going to enjoy the performance. But we're not teaching that in schools, most schools. We're not teaching that in the professional world. So I'm sort of like at a loss to understand why we're spending 98% of $300 billion developing people within roles they may not actually like, skills that may not ever transfer to roles that they find themselves in next, and only 2% of the time developing what would really get their engagement, what would really get them laser focused and enjoying and fulfilled by their job, which is those aspirational skills of curiosity, drive, energy management. You know, employees show up to work exhausted or financially drained. I sold uniforms for a little while. Here's how this relates. I promise it'll relate. I sold uniform services, textiles to, machinists and manufacturing plants. And we had a saying, what do you think about when your pants are too tight? We'd ask our clients that, because they'd be a little bit hesitant to switch from their current uniform provider. And I said, what do you think about when your pants are too tight? And they give you a funny look. And they ultimately say, well, nothing. I'm thinking about my pants being too tight. When you have an employee showing up to work that's financially out of energy, they're not thinking about work. They're thinking about their bills. That's the tightening of the fiscal belt, if you will. So we spend no time, most organizations spend no time teaching and developing financial skills, financial energy, teaching these emotional skills, emotional energy. How do I deal with stress and frustration? We just assume, oh, that's something you should learn as you're growing up. Yeah, but look around. People haven't learned that. They're clearly bringing these issues into the workplace with them. And it's not only causing the work to suffer, it's causing the worker to suffer. And it's a problem we've got. I'll get off my soapbox in 1 second. It's a problem we've already got the financial resources to address. And a study out of the UK a couple years ago showed that most employees, they surveyed 2,000 employees, and most of them said they actually worked about 3.5 hours a day. That the rest of the time was kind of just goofing off, killing time, long lunch, leisurely walk back to the office, head out for a smoke, head out for a coffee, go visit a coworker at their desk. So we've got the financial energy at work that's being spent already. We could redirect. We've got the time. I mean, this training doesn't, we're not going to go into 4 hour a day training. This is maybe 1 hour a week we add this training in. We've got the desire. In a recent survey, employees said they wanted three things. Three things would make them engage more. More money, of course. Who doesn't want that? More time off, of course. Who doesn't want that? More opportunities to develop myself professionally. Not the role I'm in, but roles that I could qualify for in the future. So we've got the need, the money, the time. What are we waiting for, my friends? What are we waiting for?
I understand that. Yeah, it's funny because it's quite serendipitous that quite often that I'll have these conversations, and then recently I'll have been listening, and maybe it's just common things that I'll be listening to something or reading something that is related. But I was listening to a podcast, the Manager Tool podcast. Again, another mention to those guys, brilliant podcast. And they were interviewing a lady, and I can't remember her name and I can't remember her podcast. And it's quite unusual for them to have. I think they've been going 17 years and they've had 5 people as guests. So that's how highly they hold this particular woman's advice. And it's all about financial. It's something FIRE, I think, financial independence, retire early, or something like that. It was her podcast that they had her on. But what they're talking about is how important it is to businesses and to managers to educate your staff and your employees about being financially stable. Because exactly as you said there, if you don't, it will affect your business, because you will not get the best them in there. You're not going to have their full attention. You're not going to have their full energy. They may be not sleeping at night. They may be trying to think, how am I going to do this? And I think the great thing that they brought out there was not just stability. If all of your employees are financially independent, and that doesn't mean that they're like multimillionaires. It just means that 3 months from now, if they lost their job, they wouldn't be worried. They'd be able to do something for 3 months. They'd be fine. They wouldn't be worrying where they pay the next bills. It changes the decisions that they make while doing their job, because they're not worried about getting sacked, because they're stable and safe outside of the organization. Isn't their be all and end all to feed their children next week. they can go there and go and take risks in some ways of saying career risks of standing up and saying the right thing rather than the safe thing. And exactly what you're saying there, if we train people in that way and people are more stable and same with health as well, because then if your health and you've got the energy, physical energy and health, you're going to be a better employee. You're going to be able to do better because you're not worrying, you're not under energy. So it's that it kind of goes back to some of the stewardship that the mill owners in the 1800s had in some ways, in that they kind of looked after the whole person who was their employee. They provided them a house. Now, I'm not suggesting we should go back to that basis of operations in employment, but some of the more forward-thinking ones were the Bournevilles and people like that, and the guys up in Lanark in Scotland, where they built an environment. They provided time off, they provided health care, they provided all care for the children and things like that. And I wonder whether we're moving back to that, and whether we should be moving back to more of that support of when you come to a business, you're supporting the whole person, not just for those 8 hours when you've taken a lump of fat out of them to deliver something for you. What do you think on that view?
So I'm thinking about a watch company in France from the 1950s, Beaumondo, I believe, and I'm probably butchering the name. Just seeing if I could Google it real quick. But anyway, they took a very paternalistic approach to management, and not just and some of that wouldn't be appropriate in today's world. But what was fascinating was that they really democratized the decision making of the companies, and we're seeing this idea sort of put forward now that perhaps there should be 2 forms of selection for managers and leaders. One obviously needs to be the senior leadership of the company deciding, yes, we believe you're a good leader. But perhaps there should be a much larger voice of the subordinate and of the entry-level worker, if you will, in deciding, is this someone that we should raise to the level of a senior manager? Is this someone who we would follow? And I see this a lot with sales organizations where the best sales performer becomes the sales manager. And I think you'd find if you ask many sales teams, that person may not be the one that they would follow. It may be the person they wish they had the sales results of, but they may not be the best leader for the job.
Yeah, and as an organization, they may not be the right person, because if they are the best salesperson, use them doing the thing that they're the best at, not managing people. Now, they may be able to educate and mentor people in the teams, but actually, if they're brilliant at selling, reward them well. I know of one organization, I was talking to someone, and they were the CIO or something, and they said, sales guy, X job, he earns 5 times as much as me. Do you know what I mean? Is the guy who owns the company comfortably paying someone 5 times more than he earns, because he knows that without that, the organization doesn't get it. And that's the person. And you don't want to take those key performers sometimes. And we all rise up to managers in project management. Quite a few of us come into it from key skills in an area, IT especially. And you're not necessarily trained in how to manage people. You're trained in those technical skills and kind of interacting with people. And then suddenly you're having to tell people what to do. And there's a book called, I think it's Boss to Bud or Bud to Boss or something like that. There's so much mindset. And you talked about mindset already. It's so much more mindset change than skill change sometimes. And that's the bit that's harder to, you can pick up a new skill, you can use it, but your mindset and dealing with that change of how everybody else sees you and how you see everybody else is something that is not always trained in very well historically. I think in some cases it is better now, but certainly historically, from my experience moving into management roles, I didn't really quite get anything to do with the mindset and the way I had to think differently.
Yeah, even in managerial roles, that disparity of how training and development is applied, that what I was speaking to earlier, that 2%, the soft skill development, the executive coaching, I mean, that really is reserved for the folks who hit director and sort of VP, or depending on the size of the company, senior VP and above level, which generally takes somewhere between 6 to 8 years to achieve, which means that we've got 8 years of every professional's life, assuming they stay at the same company, where they're being underdeveloped. And if you look at the footballer you mentioned earlier, I love ice hockey. So if you look at the NHL, or you look at ice hockey in general around the world, even 5-year-olds have hockey coaches. They have coaches. And you get to the pro league and you have several coaches. Now, how many coaches do most people have at work? None. Maybe one if you're in a director role and they assign you an executive coach. But in every other aspect of, whether it's music, you've got your teachers, right? Those are your coaches. If it's ballet, you have your dance instructors. Whatever it is, you've got coaches, but not in the thing that keeps the world running. I mean, business is a great thing. Yeah. I love the idea of business as the face of change on the planet. It's better than any government, clearly. Business can do change better when it's done ethically. When it's done ethically and consciously, business does it better. Better than the government, better than nonprofits, better than anybody, better than a single, multi-billionaire human being. Business can do it better. But only when we're fully developing our people. Only when we're getting the most out of the resources within our organization. It's sort of like if you have a gorgeous sports car. I mean, whatever your favorite color, mine's blue. Gorgeous, sexy paint job. The leather inside, it's like rich Italian. It's like butter when you touch it. Oh, it's amazing. And the stereo system and the electronics they're unbelievable. They're the best you've ever seen. Everything's in the right place. There's so much attention to detail. But there's no engine. What's that car really worth? Looks sexy, looks pretty, okay? But what's it really worth? And I don't mean to disparage anyone when I say this, but if your brain is your engine, folks, how many of us really know how to use it? Yeah. I mean, do we really understand how our brain works? Because that's not knowledge that school is telling us is valuable unless you study psychology or philosophy. Because all we're supposed to do, remember we said this earlier, is get the test done so that we can get sorted into a more appropriate box. But that's not what's happening nowadays. Now with what we're in, the knowledge economy, and there's part of the gig economy that's starting to creep up, a lot of these sort of rote tasks are being outsourced to AI or to computer programming or to algorithms. So what we really need to do to continue to be valuable to organizations is to be able to think, to use our brain better than the person standing to our left or to our right. Most of that doesn't come from job-specific training. It comes from those foundational, or what I call aspirational skills. Creativity, curiosity, gratitude. And gratitude is shown to extend lives. Gratitude helps us live on average 10 years longer than folks who are more pessimistic in their outlook on life. There's a great study called the Nun Study that you can Google. And it's from the Annals of Positive Psychology, where they talk about that they analyzed the diaries of this cloister of nuns. And what they found was when they were looking for positive or negative affect in terms of the sentiment, how they expressed their outlook on life and what they went through each day, the nuns who had more of a positive affect lived on average 10 years longer. I mean, we don't teach that.
No. It's interesting that and it's with the pandemic and the rise of mental health problems over the past, or I think it is the rise, but it's also the recognition of mental health problems as being the reduction of stigma and things like that. And I know my little one, she struggled with a bit of anxiety, and great book, Steve Peters, Chimp Paradox, and he's done one for children as well, and it's all about the how your brain works, and as you said about the brain, and she's not learned that from school. She's learned that because of a intervention of there, and I just kind of sit there and go, well, as a kid, even in primary school, learning how your brain, like they'll do things about how your physiology works, how your muscles work and all that, but actually delving into how that brain works and how things will trigger anxiety, things will trigger this, trigger that, and having those tools and techniques and understanding how, and to be fair, the school where we are, they've had some general training happening there, but it's not part of the curriculum. That's part of the mental health program. And you kind of think, again, what's the school for? Is the school for educating the kid fully? Because there's some responsibility on us as parents, but we don't know these things. And there's some stuff like that, mental health, that you don't know unless, like, I know these things now because I've gone through it with her and helped her with it. And I've listened to the Audible book of Stephen Peters' book as well, and it's helped me with some stuff. And it just contextualizes it. But it's can we use those? Teach those creativity for the sake of creativity, teaching about how the brain works and getting everyone to learn that. And I don't know, just springing off on different angles here at the minute. I'm thinking it's just popping out because I had a guy on called Simon Dutton talking about Lego Serious Play, which again is a fantastic concept, and I've seen it work with some groups that we had there, and just that whole thing of opening up that creativity and breaking down those barriers of using other things than you'd normally use in the business environment.
That's why I use a piano in my keynotes. Yeah. When you see me speaking at a conference, of course I enjoy performing. And I know that the audience enjoys that it's breaking the monotony of what is normally, a talking head circus. Yeah. But really, it's because it doesn't just break the monotony, it breaks their patterns. And if I can break their patterns, I can get them to not only be open to a different idea, but remember more of what I'm sharing. Because music activates are the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are two areas in our brain that are responsible for creativity and memory. So when I create that opening and then I share some thoughts and ideas, now they're going to retain it. They're more open to considering these different viewpoints. And then we play another song, and then we speak a little bit, and then we play another song and speak a little bit. And so what we're creating is not just an entertaining and engaging experience. We're creating deeper learning. And that's really what I think we're all striving for, is as things move quickly in life and all these different expectations are thrown at us, we really want the opportunity to pause and reflect and be able to learn a bit more deeply, whatever it is that's being thrown at us, versus just, it's just another thing I got to memorize, get through the next test.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I've seen things where they do the icebreaker sessions in some of the large groups where we have a large plenary, and then we're breaking out into groups and they'll do icebreakers. And it's really entertaining watching. I quite enjoy them. I'll get in there, I'll play games, that's fine. And there's other people who are like that, sat with their arms up, they're just arms folded and just not engaging at all. And I kind of sit there and go, yeah, I understand it. And I know some of these guys, and they'll be saying to me, really stupid, no point doing this, we've got this emails to deal with or whatever. And the thing is, I think it's modifying someone's brain one way or another. It's different to what it would be if we were in an office and a meeting room. The fact we're in a room and we're stood up talking, moaning about it, they're going to be thinking differently. They may not be as fully open and as someone who's into it, but they'll probably be paying more attention than I would be. But it's different to what, and it's, as you say, by using something different, you break down that emotional thing. Whether it's, I remember I was really pissed off when we were talking about this, and this, and it's kind of like, yeah, well, it's work then, isn't it? Because the idea is to stick and retain it, and they remember it because of that emotional connection with it, positive or negative.
Here in the US, we've got this commercial, and it's a bunch of kids. It's on the radio, and they are horribly out of tune, and all they're singing is 1877 cars for kids, KARS, cars for kids, and I hate it, but I remember it. I remember it, and that's the whole point of the ad, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's sometimes it isn't about being one way or the other. It's about being different sometimes for people to be able to remember stuff and an emotional connection, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a fellow speaker named Sally Hogshead who talks about different is better.
Yeah,
You know, better is good, but different is better.
yeah. I saw that was David Dave, David J. Phillips talking about presentations about and about the fact that I think it was him who said it is the fact that you're not going to be the best presenter. 99, well, more than 99%, 99.99999% of the people are not going to be the best presenter when you're doing a presentation. So be good and be different and memorable. And that's kind of what they talk about. And that's what you say. Is you stand out, you be different, and it'll, as long as it's quality, the next step is don't try to be the best. And that's, I think it's really good advice.
People have this obsession with the best, and I think it is sort of like an obsession with perfect.
Yeah.
And perfect is sort of like the lowest standard, actually, because you never reach it. And I think best is also a very best as a goal is a disservice. We want to be the best in our industry. Okay, what'll happen then? What will that allow you to do? We'll make more money. Well, then you really want to make more money. You don't give a shit about being the best in your you don't care about being the best in your industry. That's it's disingenuous. I would prefer an organization that shoots for we want to be among the best in our industry. Great. Shoot for the top. You can always get better. Yeah. We can always improve. But when we are obsessed with being the best, we not only do things that aren't in service of our customer, we do things that maybe aren't in our best interest. We take shortcuts. We cheat. Bend or break, not bend the rules. Yeah? So I really wish more people would strive for good, or rather strive for better than they were yesterday. Instead of judging themselves against everyone else, just judge yourself against yesterday. Was today better than yesterday? Good. Keep it up.
That's it. I've heard the phrase "perfect is the enemy of good," and it's that 80-20 rule thing, isn't it? 80% of the value you get, once you've got to 80% value of something, the next 20% is hard work and is expensive and is difficult to get up to there. It's if you want to be the best pianist in the world, let's use that. Yeah. The thing you have to do to be that best pianist in the world is astounding. If you want to be a brilliant pianist, a good pianist, a great pianist, you haven't got it. It's much lower level, isn't it? And as you say, if you say I want to be the best in the world, well, that's a lot of commitment and a lot of sacrifices in order to do that. It's like me trying to be the best podcast host in the world. I'm not sure that'll ever happen. I'm just one of my earpods just fell out, so we're just coming up on time. I think we're where we are. Is there anything that you, in these sort of conversations, that you'd normally want to chat about that we haven't covered? I know we've gone down a few different rabbit holes today.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about a lot of it, eh? So I think that what might be the most valuable thing to just mention is that if we transform the people within our team, within our project, within our organization, they will transform the business for us. I work with a lot of business owners who bring me in because they want to grow, or because they're in the midst of the growing pains that come with transformational growth. And so they want their people better equipped to navigate that change and disruption. And what I find when we dig into how they've been developing and preparing their people is that it's very operationally focused. So any leader that's listening to this, whether you lead a team or whether you just lead the person you see in the mirror, I believe we're all leaders. Yeah. So whether it's the person you see in the mirror that you're responsible for or many people that you're leading, find opportunities to transform the person, to be all that they can be. The reason that slogan worked so well for the U.S. Army is because If it had said, well, be the best marksman you can be, okay, that might appeal to a few people. Or, be the best combat soldier you can be. All right, that might appeal to a few people. But be all that you can be is not only individual, but it's got broad appeal.
Yeah.
Every person within our organization, whether it's the person we see in the mirror or the people we lead every day, there's something that they want for themselves, for their life. Can we give them skills? Can we help them transform into the type of person that gets closer to whatever that goal is? I know we can. So the real question is will we? Will you join me in this quest? I mean, this is what I do all over the world is I have this conversation with audiences, and at the end I ask them to join me, to make a commitment. We call it the performance agreement, that they will perform in a way that makes the performance of those around them better. We're not competing. We're more like a choir. We're trying to blend so that the performance is exceptional. It's one that people want to experience again and again. So I'd invite people to connect with me on LinkedIn, share their thoughts about this podcast, share their thoughts about performance at work, connect on Instagram, wherever. I'm Gregory Offner Jr. I feel like I'm pretty easy to follow or to find. Online there aren't a whole lot of Gregory Offners out there. And just connect with me. That's the thing I'd ask your audience to do. Let me know what it is that they need to develop in their career. And if I can help, I'd be happy to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gregory. It's been a fascinating talk. And it's, I've got several notes of things that I need to do and check out. And I'm sure I will be, which will allow me to, is going to be used quite a few times over the next few weeks and months, I'm sure. So all I've got to say is thank you very much and have a brilliant rest of your day.
Thanks, Nigel. You too. It's been awesome.
Cheers.
See you soon.
Cheers, mate.